This is coming to you from John Wayne's 26 Bar Ranch in Eager, Arizona.
In the southwestern part of the United States, in the late 1800s, lived a special breed of men known as the gunfighters. Their natural habitat was the frontier town, whether cattle town, railroad town, or mining town. It was not much to look at. It had its wide, unpaved streets, sun-baked in the summer, rock-hard in the winter, lined by tents or flimsy wooden shacks. Dispersed among these jerry-rigged structures was the world of the saloon and the dance hall. Dodge City, Kansas was one of these towns. It was a collecting point for cattlemen driving their herds north, for gamblers and gunfighters. It was a haven for men with notable names like Kingfisher, Ben Thompson, Doc Holliday, Wyatt Earp, Luke Short, and Wild Bill Hickok. Although unsung, Dave Mathers was probably one of the greatest gunfighters. There is nothing that breeds mystery faster than a gunfighter of few words. Dave Mathers was just such a man and became known as Mysterious Dave. He could often be seen about the saloons in Dodge, always belted properly with twin Colts bulging under his coat, stopping here and there to gaze at players at the faro table, watching others play blackjack, but never seemed to do much gambling himself. Dave was a smallish man with square but frail shoulders, dark eyes, and a dark mustache. Dave had a badge pinned to his chest, for he was indeed a deputy in Dodge City. Dave had come from a family of seafaring lawmen up in Massachusetts, and his ancestors had been rugged sailormen of the 7 seas. So Dave was made of whipcord stuff. Many claim that he was the descendant of Cotton Mather, the famous witch hunter, and Johnny Ringo. The real gunslingers of Dodge watched Dave out of the corner of their eye, because around him was a halo of mystery which they could not plumb. He could often be seen sunning himself along the boardwalk in front of the sheriff's office. One of Dodge City's most famous shootouts occurred in 1884 between Dave Mathers and Tom Nixon. Dave decided to open a saloon, but Marshal T.C. Nixon of Dodge was playing a high-handed game of politics and tried to stop him. Dave knew that Nixon was behind his problems, so he and his partner started selling their beer at less than the going rate for 2 glasses, which was 25 cents. Nixon, aided by other saloon owners, lobbied the beer suppliers, and Dave soon went dry. Dave now made it known that he was out to get Nixon. Dave and Nixon quarreled in the street. Nixon took a shot at Dave. Fortunately for Dave, the ball missed. It struck a porch beam, showering him with wooden splinters, one of which embedded itself in his left hand. Dave claimed to have been unarmed. Nixon was promptly disarmed and taken to jail. Nixon claimed that Dave reached for his gun before he attempted to draw his own. Dave said that he would make no complaint, but he told Nixon to get out of Dodge. Nixon was later released on bail to appear at the next session on the charges of assault with intent to kill. Nixon came up for trial. Dave refused to make a statement. So Tom Nixon was released. Later that day, on July 21st, 1884, Nixon was on the corner of Front Street and First Avenue, loading his pistol. Dave yelled at him. Tom raised his pistol. Dave shot him 4 times. Bat Masterson was the first to reach him, but he was dead. Nixon was deemed to be the original aggressor. As Dave had had witnesses, it was merely a case of self-defense. Later, Dave was seen sunning himself in front of the sheriff's office. Dave had become known as a killer lawman. One Sunday morning, Dave went to the Long Branch Saloon, where most of the cowboys and the local people were already drinking it up and gambling. Dave was dressed in his best Sunday duds. He was involved in a poker game with 2 men at the end of the bar. One man got violent. Dave ordered him out of the bar. The men at the bar looked briefly at Dave and then went back to their talking and their drinking. A preacher came to town and came into the Long Branch. He looked around to see who was in charge. After spotting the man who was in charge, he went over to ask him if he could preach a sermon, which was the tradition in those days. After the sermon, they would pass the hat and the preacher would leave. This was a form of entertainment to the men at the bar. After getting permission from the bartender, the preacher went over across from the bar and started getting ready to preach his sermon. He checked the time, and it was close to noon. He opened his Bible and took a passage from Mark. He started his preaching in a low monotone. But soon his preaching became more heated. After all, these men were drinking and gambling on the Lord's Day. The men at the bar just laughed and went on with their activities. Most of these men figured that they'd already bought their place in hell, and they weren't about ready to change now. They were showing nothing but contempt for the traveling sky pilot. As the preacher began to condemn the men for their sinning and their disrespect of the Word, he recognized Dave sitting at the table with one of the other men. Dave figured that he'd had enough, put on his hat and was about to leave. He knew of Dave's reputation and wanted to single him out in his sermon. Dave was getting a little liquored up and decided he'd stay for a little while longer. The preacher directed his religion at Dave, saying that he would gladly die to save this man who had sent 7 men to hell, and that he needed to wash the blood from his hands. Dave stood up, drew one of his pistols, and pointed it at the preacher. The preacher was petrified. Dave fired one shot. The bullet earmarked the preacher. The preacher ran for the door and left. Everybody in the bar scurried for cover, not knowing what Dave was going to shoot at next. One man, hiding under a table, figured that he definitely needed a drink. Dave holstered his pistol. The shooting was over. He had proved his point. The men all came back to the bar and continued their talking and their drinking. The man that had been playing cards with Dave sat back down, and Dave began to deal the cards. A gang of desperados known as the Henry Bunch were camped outside of town with a herd of stolen cattle. With the vast herds of longhorns coming up from Texas, it was an easy chore for these men to cut out a few head out of each one of the herds. Maybe even gather up some strays. Then they would sell them in town at the railhead for a bargain price of $1 a head. The gang decided to go to town one evening to sell the herd and to have a night on the town. After delivering the cattle and collecting their money, they started an all-night round of the bars, the gambling houses, and the dance halls. This time, Marshal Tom Carson had proof of their ill-gotten gains. He tried to arrest them on the streets the next morning. The gang was not about ready to be taken. The men spread out, 3 against 1. The leader gave a signal. They drew and fired. Carson was hit 4 times, in the legs and in the arms. He collapsed in the street. Dave and several men took him back to his room, where he died a short time later from loss of blood. But before he died, Dave assured him that he would kill every last one of the Henry outfit. Dave polished his badge, then checked his guns, and made sure that they were fully loaded. He knew the odds were against him. But these men had nerves of steel. He started off down Main Street. His first stop was the Long Branch Saloon, where he spotted one of the men sitting at a table. The man went for his Derringer. Dave killed him. The other man went for his gun. Then Mather walked out the side door with the barkeep following him, wanting to know who was going to pay to have all that mess cleaned up. Dave continued to reload his weapons. The bartender from the Long Branch continued to badger Dave for somebody to pay for the damage and to clean up the mess. Dave motioned him over, asked him if $20 would take care of the damage and get the place cleaned up. The barkeep said it would. Dave spotted another member of the gang. The man took the hammer thong off his pistol. The man drew his pistol. Dave shot him twice in the chest. Another one came at him with a shotgun. Dave holstered his pistols. Looking down Main Street, he spotted another one. He yelled out for him to stop. The man took a few steps forward. He was armed with a sawed-off shotgun, pointed at Dave. A man on the street said that he had seen 3 more heading for the corrals. The 3 figured it was time to get out of town. Dave started down the street to confront them. They were about ready to mount up. They saw Mather. One rode out of town. Dave sent a shot after him, but missed. He had cut down 7 men and left them lying from the boardwalk on up to the Long Branch. Nobody had ever seen such a gun battle before. It was difficult to believe that this quiet little man could have done this kind of damage. Later, he resumed his seat in front of the sheriff's office. Mysterious Dave Mather was famous for taking his time. In a heated saloon argument at the Long Branch, 2 men invited Dave to shoot it out with them in the street. Mather calmly drew his 2 pistols and pointed them at the men. As he cocked the pistols, one man said, "Wait, you have to give us enough time to go and heal ourselves." After a short discussion on the rules of the game and the time and the place, the 2 men departed. After arming themselves with 2 Colts apiece, the 2 men looked down the street. After checking their weapons, they started their march to the appointed place. This gunfight probably inspired the walk and draw shootout so beloved by novels and Hollywood films. Contrary to popular belief, most of the opponents already had their guns out of the leather, cocked and ready to fire. After stopping and telling a storekeeper that he better clear the street, they continued their march. Dave was approaching from the other end, about 50 yards away. The 2 men started to fire. The 2 men had emptied the chambers of each of their revolvers and had shifted to the second gun. At a distance of 30 yards, his first shot killed one of the men. Dave had waited until the big man had come a few paces closer, allowing him 2 or 3 last shots, then fired once again. The 2 dead men's fingers were still on the trigger of their cocked 6-shooters when the storekeeper rolled them over in the road. Dave shook his head, turned around, and left. When the smoke and the legends were cleared away, the fact was that an experienced gunman considered themselves proficient if in an actual shootout they could hit a man at the distance of 15 yards. Later that morning, the town was back to normal. Dave had ridden out to his small ranch on the outskirts of town. There had been a quick hearing, and the judge rendered the decision that he was justified because it was 2 against 1. It wasn't long before the killer Lawman was back in the saloons with his twin Colts bulging under his coat, watching others play blackjack and faro. Later that afternoon, he was back sunning himself in front of the sheriff's office. He left Dodge in the late 1800s and journeyed 1,500 miles horseback to San Francisco. He was never to return to Dodge. These men that wanted to be gunfighters left little as possible to chance and spent many long hours refining their skills with weapons. In later life, Dave described the vigorous training that was necessary to enable a man to throw lead quickly and straight, as though by instinct. To accustom his hands to the pistols of those days, a man who coveted a reputation started early and practiced with them just as a card sharp practices with his cards. When he could draw, cock, and fire all in one lightning quick movement, he could detach his mind from the movement and the concentration on accuracy. The single-action Colt, Smith & Wesson, and Remington revolvers, the favorite handguns of the West, had to be cocked manually for each shot. Their ammunition, lead bullets propelled from black powder cartridges, had some serious disadvantages. The black powder absorbed moisture, which caused many misfirings. Each shot sent out a puff of dark gray smoke so thick that it impaired the accurate aiming of the following shot. Even though these weapons were state-of-the-art for this period, they were prone to misfire and to malfunction frequently. After a short stay in San Francisco, Dave decided that there really wasn't much call for a man of his skills there. He left by boat and went to Canada, where he enlisted in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Dave was at heart an Englishman anyhow. He had had over 25 major gunfights and had killed at least 15 men. But he was never known as a back shooter. Dave defined himself with one simple statement: I'm a shootist. The odd word shootist carried all the professional status and pride of an artist or a chemist. Dave was born in 1851, and it's really not known when he died. He was still seen in the royal blue and red as late as 1920. Although unsung, mysterious Dave Mather was one of our great gunfighters of the Old West. Gunfighters, gunfighters, just stalking by. Gunfighters, gunfighters, giving the devil one more try. They never knew what hit them when an ambush was at hand, and they never saw their lifeblood dripping slowly on the sand.
This was brought to you from John Wayne's 26 Bar Ranch in Eagar, Arizona.